Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the shadows of medieval Europe, a time when survival wasn't about honor or glory, but about silence, stealth, and the sharp edge of a blade. Forget the glamorous Hollywood assassins, the real ones lived in filth, crept through castle corridors, and vanished without a trace. One whispered name, one swift strike, and kingdoms trembled. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you love these deep dives into history's darkest corners. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's step into the boots of a medieval assassin, a life where survival was brutal, blood-soaked, and lived entirely in the shadows. The flicker of torchlight danced against the jagged stone walls, casting elongated shadows that twisted and writhed like spectral phantoms. Beneath the bustling cobblestones of medieval streets, where merchants hawked their wares and noblemen paraded in fine silks, another world thrived, one cloaked in secrecy, bathed in whispers, and sharpened by the edge of a blade. It was the world of assassins. Forget the tales of hooded men scaling castle walls with the grace of shadows. Disregard the romanticized ballads of noble rogues slipping silently through moonlit courtyards. The reality of medieval assassins was far more brutal, far less poetic. Becoming an assassin wasn't a choice, it was a surrender. A resignation to desperation, poverty, or vengeance. Those who stalked the shadows did so not out of honor or creed, but out of necessity. Most assassins were not the sleek, disciplined killers of legend. They were the discarded souls, orphans raised in filth, disgraced soldiers stripped of rank and dignity, thieves with steady hands and desperate hearts. In the crowded slums of bustling cities like Paris, London, or Florence, these men and women learned the art of silence not from masters, but from survival. Hunger taught them patience. Fear taught them caution. The lash of cruelty taught them how to disappear. The initiation into this life wasn't some grand ceremony. It was often a matter of survival. A whispered suggestion from a local fence, a job offered in hushed tones behind a tavern, the kind of job that paid not in coin but in the promise of safety, food, and a place to sleep that wasn't drenched in rainwater. If you succeeded, you got another job. If you failed, you were left to rot, your name forgotten, your body discarded like refuse in the gutter. The first kill was always the hardest. For most, it came unexpectedly. A baron's rival, a merchant who cheated the wrong lord, or perhaps a noble's bastard whose existence threatened the stability of inheritance. The target was irrelevant. It was the act that mattered. The first time the blade sank into flesh, the first time the warmth of blood stained calloused hands, that was the true initiation. If you could live with it, you became a shadow. If you couldn't, the streets soon reclaimed you. Training was a myth. There were no grand halls where masked mentors demonstrated the arcane art of the kill. There were no candlelit rooms where novices practiced on dummies. Instead, there were alleyways where silence was survival, rooftops where balance was the difference between life and a splattered end, and darkened rooms where poison was brewed from roots and fungi, tested not by instruction, but by trial, and often, error. To be an assassin was to embrace solitude. Companionship was a risk. Loose tongues led to nooses. A confidant today could be a betrayer tomorrow. The life of a killer was one of perpetual distrust, a constant evaluation of threats. Even clients, those who paid for the blade, were treated with suspicion. The man who handed you a pouch of coins for a life ended could just as easily hand your name to the gallows if it suited his purposes. The tools of the trade were crude but effective. Daggers, slim and easily concealed, poisoned needles tipped with aconite or belladonna, ropes for garroting, and occasionally a well-placed bolt from a crossbow. The methods were never elegant, but they were efficient. An assassin was not a swordsman. There was no glory in the duel, no flourish of steel under the moonlight. There was only the flash of a blade in the dark, the wet gasp of surprise, and the quickening rush of footsteps back into the shadows. Yet, for those who thrived in this life, there was power. The power to strike fear into the hearts of those who believed themselves untouchable. Nobles who slept with daggers under their pillows, merchants who hired food tasters out of paranoid necessity, guards who eyed the shadows with a nervous twitch, they all knew the whispers. There are those who kill for coin, and no wall is high enough to keep them out. In this world, names were currency. A whispered name could buy a life, could end a bloodline, could topple fortunes. But to speak one's own name was a death sentence. Those who lasted learned to abandon their pasts. They became ghosts, existing only in the fleeting moments between one breath and the last. To be known was to be hunted, and an assassin who was hunted did not last long. This was not the life of heroes. This was the life of shadows, where blades spoke louder than words and loyalty was the edge of a dagger pressed to a throat. And in the heart of this darkness, amidst the twisted alleys and flickering torchlight, the assassins thrived, not by honor, but by fear, not by choice, but by fate. Because in the shadows, there is no glory. Only survival. And those who mastered it did so not with flair or flourish, but with silence, precision, and a heart as cold as the steel they wielded. The life of an assassin was often decided not by strength, but by whispers. The cobblestones of medieval cities were rivers of information. Brokers, beggars, and whores carried secrets like drifting leaves, swirling and settling in the darkest corners. It was here, in the labyrinth of stone and shadow, that contracts were born. The man known only as the broker sat in the back of a tavern so dilapidated it had no name. The windows were caked with grime, filtering daylight into a sickly hue, and the stench of old ale mingled with the sharper tang of desperation. He was a large man, not in height but in girth, with fingers that sparkled with rings and a gaze that could cut through bone. His business was not advertised, nor was it secret. Those who needed him knew where to find him. Those who didn't never wandered close enough to care. Today, a visitor came, a young man, barely past 20, with eyes that still held flickers of hope. That would fade soon enough. He approached the broker's table with hesitation, glancing around as if the shadows might betray him. The broker raised a brow, his thick fingers drumming the wood. "You looking to buy or sell?" he rasped, voice like gravel against steel. The young man swallowed hard. "Sell," he whispered, barely loud enough to be heard. The broker leaned back, appraising him. "You don't look like a seller," he remarked, his gaze lingering on the man's trembling hands. "But appearances ain't everything, are they?" He leaned forward, his rings clicking softly against the table. "Who?" The boy hesitated, then leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. The broker listened, nodding slowly. "Dangerous name," he muttered. "And you? What's your price?" The boy's hands stopped shaking. His voice grew steady, even hard. "Enough to leave this place. Enough to disappear." The broker's smile was thin and sharp. Disappearing's easy. Staying gone, that's the trick. He reached beneath the table, producing a small pouch of silver coins. Half now. Half when it's done. He paused, eyes narrowing. And if you fail, don't bother coming back. The boy nodded, scooping the pouch into his coat and slipping back into the shadows. The broker watched him go, shaking his head. Too green, he muttered to himself. He'll be lucky to last the week. But the young man was not the only one with business that night. As the tavern doors creaked closed behind him, another figure stepped forward, shrouded in a cloak that brushed the floor. Taller, leaner, moving with the silent grace of one who knew how to vanish. The broker's demeanor changed instantly, posture straighter, eyes sharper. This was no novice. The figure sat without invitation. A gloved hand reached across the table, dropping a scrap of parchment. No words were exchanged. The broker unfolded the paper, eyes scanning the single name written in elegant, looping script. He raised his gaze, and for the first time in years, his expression faltered. This one's protected, he murmured, almost to himself. The figure across from him did not flinch, did not blink. The silence stretched, heavy and unyielding. Finally, the broker sighed, fingers rubbing the bridge of his nose. Double the usual rate, he grunted, slipping the parchment into his coat. And if it goes bad? I never saw you. The figure inclined their head, stood, and disappeared back into the night. The broker watched the door for a long time after it closed, the shadows seeming to cling thicker in its frame. He muttered something under his breath, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a curse. It was hard to tell the difference in this line of work. Meanwhile, across the city, the young man hurried through back alleys slick with rain, clutching the pouch of silver like a lifeline. His heart pounded with every step, but it wasn't fear that gripped him, it was purpose. He had a name, he had a price, and now, he had a chance to escape. But chances, like shadows, were fleeting. And the city had a way of swallowing the hopeful whole. The city was a maze of stone and silence by night. Lanterns flickered weakly against the damp fog that clung to the narrow alleys, casting long shadows that stretched and writhed with each gust of wind. It was in these shadows that the young man, whose real name was already slipping away, stalked his prey. His hands were steady now, the tremor replaced with a sense of grim determination. He had no master, no teacher, just instinct and desperation. The target's name had been etched into his mind from the moment the broker had whispered it across that ale-stained table. Gerhardt the Iron Hand, a merchant by title, but in truth, little more than a glorified extortionist. His wealth was built on the backs of the desperate, squeezing coin from those with nothing left to give. It wasn't just about the silver. It was about justice, or at least, that's what the young man told himself. The house was simple by noble standards but fortified well enough. Iron-barred windows, thick wooden doors banded with steel, and a pair of guards that paced lazily at the front gate, their breath steaming in the cold night air. He watched from the shadows, counting their steps, memorizing their rhythm. Step. Pause. Turn. Step. Pause. Turn. Like clockwork. He slipped around the side of the building, boots silent against the cobblestones, his cloak blending into the murk of the unlit paths. A servant's entrance loomed ahead, barely visible behind stacked barrels and broken crates. It was locked, of course, but locks were little more than obstacles for the determined. A slim blade, not much thicker than a knitting needle, slipped into the keyhole. A twist, a click, and the door swung open with a soft groan of protest. He paused, listening. No movement. No shouts. The guards remained oblivious. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The warmth of the kitchen greeted him, the scent of stale bread and burnt stew lingering in the air. Shadows danced across the walls, flickering in the firelight. He stayed low, moving with a cat-like grace that belied his lack of formal training. Instinct, it seemed, was its own kind of education. The staircase lay just beyond the kitchen, its banister polished to a dark sheen. He ran his gloved hand along it as he ascended, fingers brushing dustless wood. The servants kept the place spotless, no doubt under threat of Ironhand's cruelty. It was almost poetic, he thought, that a man so obsessed with control would meet his end at the hands of chaos. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before him, lined with doors, all shut tight. He moved quickly, heart pounding with each step, until he reached the end. The door was larger, reinforced, a lock of iron and brass glinting in the dim light. He reached for his tools, but paused. A faint flicker of light crept from beneath the door, swaying slightly, candlelight. Someone was awake. He crouched, eye to the keyhole. The view was narrow, distorted, but enough. Gerhardt sat at a desk, quill in hand, scratching lines across a piece of parchment. He wore a robe of fine linen, and his hair, streaked with silver, hung loose around his shoulders. The room was grander than the rest of the house. Heavy drapes of crimson velvet framed the windows, and the walls were adorned with paintings of ancestors long since buried. A fireplace crackled against the far wall, casting flickers of gold across shelves cluttered with scrolls and ledgers. The young man took a breath, steadying himself. His fingers found the hilt of the dagger at his belt. It was simple, unadorned, but sharp enough for the task. He pressed his hand against the door, feeling the cool grain of the wood, and leaned in. No guards inside. No movement beyond Gerhardt's scribbling. It was now or never. He turned the handle. The door gave way without protest, and he stepped inside, silent as the grave. Gerhardt didn't even look up. The scratching of the quill continued, steady and rhythmic, as if the world outside that office simply did not exist. The young man approached, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet that sprawled across the stone floor. He was close now, so close he could see the ink pooling at the tip of Gerhardt's quill, see the flicker of candlelight reflecting off the glass decanters on the shelf. The moment came and went in a breath. His hand shot out, covering Gerhardt's mouth, the other driving the dagger forward, quick and clean. The man jerked, eyes wide, quill tumbling from his grasp to smear ink across the parchment. A muffled scream, a shudder, and then silence. Gerhardt's body slumped forward, head hitting the desk with a dull thud. The young man held him there for a moment longer, feeling the last tremors of life fade away. He stepped back, breathing hard, the room suddenly feeling smaller, tighter. Blood pooled across the desk, soaking into papers, spilling onto the floor. He hadn't considered the mess. The dagger dripped crimson, and for a moment, he just stared at it, at the evidence of what he'd done. But there was no time for hesitation. He moved quickly, wiping the blade clean on the drapes, scanning the room for anything of value. A small pouch of coins sat on the edge of the desk. He took it. Papers, maps, letters, he left those. Information was not his concern. When he slipped back into the night, it was as if he'd never been there. The fog swallowed him whole, the streets whispering in his wake. He didn't stop moving, not until the house was a distant memory, not until the blood on his hands had dried to dark smudges. He clutched the pouch of coins tightly, feeling the weight of it, the weight of what he'd done. His first contract. His first kill. He expected to feel something more, guilt, regret, perhaps even pride. But there was only the silence of the night and the knowledge that now, he belonged to the shadows. Would you like me to proceed with Part 4, where the young assassin begins to unravel the web of conspiracies and betrayals that led him to this path? The city breathed differently after midnight. The lanterns burned lower, the cobblestones grew slick with fog, and the whispers in the taverns grew quieter. The young assassin, still nameless even to himself, moved through the darkness like a ghost. The pouch of coins sat heavy in his cloak, clinking softly with each step. It wasn't much, but it was proof. Proof that he could do this, that he could be more than just another starving soul on the edge of survival. His path led him back to the broker, the man with the slick grin and oily eyes who seemed to know every dark secret that crept through the city's veins. He found him where he always did, tucked away in the back of a crooked inn, its walls sagging with age and neglect. The broker was hunched over a ledger, quill scratching furiously as if he were tallying the sins of the city itself. The young man slid into the seat across from him, letting the coin pouch fall onto the table with a dull thud. The broker didn't look up, just smiled that greasy smile and finished scrawling his note before finally glancing up. His eyes flicked to the pouch, then back to the young man's face. "Efficient," the broker remarked, slipping the pouch from the table and weighing it in his hand. "Gerhardt won't be missed, I imagine." A lot of people owed him coin, and now, well, debts have a funny way of disappearing when the collector stops breathing. The young man said nothing, just watched as the broker counted out his share with practiced fingers. The rest slid back across the table, clinking softly. "You're cut," he said simply. "You've earned it." The young man nodded, scooping up the coins. He didn't ask questions. He'd learned not to. Questions got you answers you didn't want. Questions got you dead. "And I suppose you'll be wanting more work," the broker continued, his smile sharpening. "It's not often I come across someone with your talents." He slid a piece of parchment across the table, the edges frayed and smeared with ink. A name was scrawled across it in sharp, jagged letters, Gregor Voss. "A merchant?" the young man asked, breaking his own rule. The broker chuckled, low and rough. "Of sorts," he replied. "Voss deals in things a bit more lucrative than grain or cloth. Weapons. Information. Secrets." He leaned back in his chair, studying the young man with something that almost resembled admiration. "Killing Voss won't just end one man's miserable existence. It'll send a message. His allies are powerful, connected. They'll be watching. You up for that?" The young man hesitated, the weight of the coin pouch suddenly feeling heavier in his hand. "And if I say no?" The broker shrugged, the motion as fluid as it was insincere. "Then you walk out of here with your purse full and your conscience clear. But I think we both know that's not how this goes." The young man looked down at the parchment, fingers tracing the jagged ink of Gregor Voss's name. He didn't know the man. Had never even heard of him before tonight. But that didn't matter. This was the way things were now. This was the life he had chosen. Or perhaps the life that had chosen him. "Fine," he said finally, folding the parchment and tucking it into his cloak. "Where?" The broker's grin widened, exposing a mouth full of yellowing teeth. "His estate. North end of the city. Guarded, but not too heavily. Voss likes to think he's untouchable. Most men in his line of work do, until they're not." The young man stood, his movements smooth and practiced now, the fear replaced with cold resolve. The broker watched him with eyes like polished stone, unblinking and unyielding. "Be quick, be quiet," he called after him. "And don't make it messy. People are watching now." The young man didn't look back. He slipped out into the night, his footsteps swallowed by the city's whispers. His path was set. His fate sealed. Gregor Voss didn't know it yet, but death was coming for him, silent and swift. The northern district of the city wore its wealth openly, like a drunkard flaunting stolen coin. Cobblestones were clean, lanterns burned brighter, and the buildings loomed taller, their windows draped in silks and velvet. The young assassin moved through the shadows, his footsteps soft, his breath steady. Gregor Voss's estate lay at the far edge of the district, flanked by towering iron gates and thick stone walls. He had spent the last 3 days studying it from the alleys and rooftops, watching the guards move in predictable patterns, counting the rotations, noting the change of shifts. He knew there were 6 of them, 2 at the gate, 2 on patrol, and 2 more who roamed the grounds at random. That was the danger of power. It made men lazy. Confident. Voss had built his empire on secrets and fear, and he wielded them like weapons. But it was also the sort of power that made men think they were invincible. Tonight, Voss would learn the price of arrogance. The young assassin waited until the moon dipped low behind the clouds, casting the estate in darkness. He moved silently, slipping between shadows, his cloak whispering against the stone. He reached the outer wall, fingers searching for the crevices he had memorized. The climb was smooth and practiced, each foothold found without hesitation. At the top, he paused, listening. A guard strolled past, his armor clinking softly, torchlight flickering off polished metal. He barely looked up, his attention fixed on the pathway ahead. The assassin watched him disappear around the corner before slipping down the other side, landing silently in the damp grass. He waited, listening to the stillness, the distant hum of the city beyond the walls. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows dark, curtains drawn. He moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, pausing only to listen to the whispers of the wind. His target would be in his study. Voss was a creature of habit, and the assassin had watched him pace back and forth in that room for hours the night before, the glow of candlelight casting his shadow long and thin against the drapes. A window at the back was left slightly ajar, the lock rusted and neglected. The assassin slipped inside, landing softly on the wooden floor. His eyes adjusted quickly to the gloom. Bookshelves lined the walls, thick with dust and parchment. The scent of pipe smoke lingered, mingling with the tang of ink and old paper. Footsteps echoed from the hallway, heavy and deliberate. The assassin moved to the shadows, slipping behind a curtain just as the door creaked open. A figure stepped inside, broad-shouldered and cloaked in fur, his hair silvered with age but his posture still strong. Gregor Voss. He moved to his desk, oblivious to the shadow watching from mere feet away. Voss poured himself a drink, the glass clinking softly against the bottle. He sighed, settling back into his chair, gaze fixed on the flames flickering in the hearth. For a moment, the assassin waited, studying the man. This was the one who controlled secrets, who whispered names to the broker, who pulled the strings of men like a puppeteer in the dark. There was no hesitation. The assassin stepped from the shadows, blade whispering from its sheath. Voss barely had time to turn before the blade found its mark, sliding between ribs with practiced precision. His eyes went wide, mouth opening in a gasp, but no sound came out. Blood spilled over his lips, staining the white of his collar as he sagged forward, the glass slipping from his hand and shattering against the floor. The assassin held him steady, eyes locked with Voss's, watching as the light drained from them, as the breath rattled out of his lungs. It was quick. Clean. Just as the broker had asked. But as he lowered Voss's body to the ground, something caught his eye. A letter, half-sealed with crimson wax, still clutched in Voss's hand. Curiosity, or perhaps instinct, made him take it. He slipped the letter into his cloak, wiping his blade clean on Voss's fur cloak before stepping back into the shadows. He moved quickly, retracing his path through the mansion, slipping out the window and back over the wall before the guard made his next turn. He didn't stop moving until he was back in the safety of his own darkened corner of the city. Only then did he draw the letter from his cloak, breaking the seal and unfolding the parchment. His eyes scanned the lines, the words scrawled in tight, deliberate strokes. It was a list. Names. Dozens of them. Some crossed out, others underlined. He recognized a few: merchants, minor nobles, men who had disappeared without explanation or been found dead in the river. But others were powerful. Men he had only heard whispers about. At the bottom of the list was a name that made his blood run cold. It was his. Uncrossed. Unmarked. His name, written in bold, unmistakable ink. Someone had known. Someone had planned. A sharp knock at the door shattered his concentration. He moved quickly, folding the letter and slipping it into his cloak. His hand went to the hilt of his dagger as he moved towards the door, pressing his ear to the wood. Nothing. Another knock, louder this time. He hesitated, then cracked the door, blade at the ready. No one was there. Just the empty alley, stretching off into darkness. He glanced around, heart hammering, then stepped back inside, closing the door and drawing the bolt. But when he turned back, he saw it, an envelope, laid neatly on the floor just beyond the threshold. He picked it up, breaking the seal and unfolding the note inside. It was a single line, written in the same jagged script as the list. "You're not as hidden as you think." The words on the parchment burned in his mind long after he had tossed it into the fire. "You're not as hidden as you think." It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration. Someone was watching him. Someone who knew enough to reach his door without being seen, who knew his name and his movements. The assassin leaned back in his chair, the flicker of the flames casting long shadows across the walls. His hand rested on the folded list of names he had taken from Voss's estate. He unfolded it once more, studying the names, the markings, the symbols scrawled in the margins. It wasn't just a list. It was a ledger, a tally of lives, a record of those who were bought, sold, silenced, or erased. And his name was on it. He couldn't stay. Not here. Not in this hole in the wall where shadows slipped beneath the door and threats were left like morning bread. He had grown comfortable, sloppy. He couldn't afford to be either. With practiced efficiency, he gathered his things, stuffing them into a small satchel. The coin, the daggers, the vial of poison he kept tucked under his mattress, everything was packed and ready within minutes. He paused only once, glancing back at the dying embers in the hearth. A part of him wondered if he would ever see this place again. But sentimentality was a luxury for softer souls. He turned his back on the warmth and slipped out into the night. The city was colder than usual, the fog curling through the alleys like skeletal fingers. He moved quickly, keeping to the edges of the light, his footsteps muffled by the dampness of the cobblestones. He didn't have a plan, not yet, but he knew where he had to go. The broker. He found him in his usual haunt, tucked away in the back of the crooked inn, surrounded by the flicker of candlelight and the haze of pipe smoke. The room was half empty, the patrons too drunk or too tired to notice when the assassin slipped inside and took a seat across from the man who held the city's secrets. The broker didn't look up right away. He scribbled something onto a ledger, his quill scratching furiously, before finally glancing up with that slick grin. "You're back sooner than I expected," he drawled, leaning back in his chair. "I take it Voss was accommodating?" The assassin tossed the parchment onto the table, watching as the broker's eyes flicked to it, his smile faltering for just a moment. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the assassin saw it. He had spent his life reading the flicker of eyes, the tremor of fingers, the tension of shoulders. "Interesting," the broker said finally, picking up the parchment and unfolding it. He glanced at it briefly before folding it again and sliding it back across the table. "And here I thought Voss kept better records than that." The assassin didn't touch the paper. "My name's on it," he said evenly. "Unmarked." The broker's smile returned, sharper than before. "Shouldn't that be a good thing?" he asked. "Still breathing, still working. That's more than some can say." The assassin leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Someone left me a note. Knew where I was. Knew my name. Said I wasn't as hidden as I thought." The broker raised an eyebrow, his expression turning thoughtful. "That is inconvenient," he said finally, steepling his fingers. "You think it was Voss?" "He was dead," the assassin replied. Throat opened like a wine skin. "He didn't write it." The broker nodded slowly, tapping his fingers against the table. "Well," he sighed, "someone has been watching. And if they know where you are, it's not going to stop." The assassin didn't flinch. "Who?" The broker chuckled softly, shaking his head. "If I knew that, I wouldn't be sitting here, would I?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But I can tell you this, there are names on that list more important than Voss. People with deeper pockets and sharper blades. You kill a man like Voss, you stir the nest. Someone's going to come looking for you." The assassin's hand drifted to the dagger at his side. "And you didn't think to mention this before?" The broker shrugged, his grin never fading. "Would you have taken the job if I had?" The assassin didn't answer. They both knew the truth. Of course, he would have. The broker pushed back his chair, stretching his legs. "I can make a few inquiries," he said casually. "Find out who's sniffing around. But it'll cost you." "How much?" "Not coin," the broker replied, eyes gleaming. "I need something specific handled. A name on that list, actually." He tapped the parchment with one long, bony finger. "You do that, and I find out who left you that message. Call it mutual benefit." The assassin considered it, the flicker of the flames casting long shadows across the broker's face. He knew it wasn't a choice. Not really. Whoever had left that message wasn't done. And if the broker could get him answers, then it was a price worth paying. "Fine," he said, his voice steady. "Who?" The broker smiled, sliding a new piece of parchment across the table. The name was written in the same sharp, jagged script, Marcus Vale. "Who is he?" the assassin asked. The broker's grin widened. "A whisperer," he replied. "A collector of secrets. And, more importantly, the man who knows who's been watching you." The assassin took the parchment, folding it neatly and tucking it into his cloak. He stood, slipping back into the shadows. But as he moved towards the door, the broker's voice followed him. "Be careful," he called softly. "This one won't go as easily as Voss." The assassin didn't reply. He slipped back into the fog-soaked night, the name Marcus Vale burning in his mind. This wasn't just another job. This was personal. And he wasn't going to stop until he found out who was watching. The streets of the city lay silent under the weight of midnight. Fog clung to the cobblestones, swirling around his ankles as he moved through the alleys with practiced grace. The name Marcus Vale was etched into his mind, a shadow lingering at the edge of every step. The broker had been right, this was different. Voss had been a brute, a thug with money and influence but no real skill for subterfuge. But Marcus Vale? The name was whispered in hushed tones among those who operated in the shadows. A collector of secrets, a puppeteer whose strings reached deeper than most dared to imagine. The assassin had heard tales of Vale before, stories of blackmail, of whispers that toppled guilds and nobles alike. He wasn't just a name on a ledger, he was the ledger. Finding him was the first challenge. Vale didn't operate out of brothels or taverns like common thieves. His office was the city itself, his guards the unseen eyes of beggars, informants, and street urchins. He had built his power not on steel, but on silence. The assassin slipped through the fog-drenched alleys, his footsteps silent, his breath controlled. He followed the whispers, the looks exchanged in the back alleys, the flicker of eyes from the shadows. It took hours, but finally, he found the right door. It was unmarked, nestled between two crumbling buildings, its wooden frame warped and swollen from years of rain. He paused, listening for any sign of movement. Nothing. He knocked once, sharp and deliberate. Silence. He reached for the handle, turning it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow stairwell leading down into darkness. He hesitated only for a moment before descending, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. The air grew colder with each step, the walls damp and slick with condensation. At the bottom of the stairs, a lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the stone walls. And there, waiting in the gloom, stood a man. "You're bolder than most," the man said, his voice smooth and unhurried. "Most people knock and run. You walked right in." The assassin regarded him with cold eyes. "Marcus Vale?" The man smiled, his teeth flashing in the dim light. He wore simple clothes, nothing extravagant, but the way he held himself spoke of confidence, of power. "That depends," he replied, stepping forward. "Who's asking?" The assassin didn't flinch. "I'm here for answers." Vale chuckled, folding his hands behind his back. "Everyone is," he mused. "That's the problem with this city. Too many questions, not enough silence." The assassin took a step closer, his movements measured. "Someone left me a note," he began. "Said I wasn't as hidden as I thought. Knew where I was. Knew my name." Vale raised an eyebrow, his expression one of mild amusement. "And you think I left it?" "I think you know who did," the assassin replied, his voice low and steady. Vale considered him for a long moment, the flicker of the lantern casting shadows across his face. Finally, he sighed. "Perhaps I do," he admitted, moving to a nearby desk cluttered with papers and half-melted candles. He sifted through a pile, pulling out a small, folded note. "You made waves when you killed Voss," he continued, not looking up. "People noticed. People who usually stay quiet." The assassin watched as Vale unfolded the note, his fingers precise and deliberate. He handed it over without a word. The assassin took it, his eyes scanning the lines. "You've stepped into the light. Shadows will find you. No name. No mark. Just the words, scrawled in tight, hurried script." He folded it, tucking it into his cloak. "Who wrote it?" Vale leaned back against the desk, crossing his arms. "If I tell you, you won't like the answer," he said calmly. "Try me," the assassin replied. Vale sighed, his gaze steady. "There's a group," he began. "They call themselves the Silent Order. Not thieves, not assassins, not like you. They don't kill for coin. They kill for influence. For control." The assassin frowned. "Never heard of them." "You wouldn't have," Vale replied. "Not unless you were on their list." He felt a chill creep up his spine. "And I'm on their list?" Vale smiled faintly, nodding. "Seems that way. Killing Voss wasn't just a contract. You disrupted something. He was small-time, sure. But he was connected. His death drew attention. The kind you don't want." The assassin's hand flexed near his dagger, instinctively. "Why tell me this?" Vale shrugged. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill. Information for information. What do you want?" Vale's smile widened. "Names. I want the names from Voss's ledger. All of them." The assassin paused. "And if I say no?" Vale spread his hands. "Then I suppose we part ways, and you stumble around in the dark until someone finds you in a ditch." The assassin considered him for a long moment, the silence stretching thin. Finally, he reached into his cloak, pulling out the folded parchment. "You better make this worth it," he growled, tossing it onto the desk. Vale wasted no time, unfolding it and scanning the names. His eyes flickered with recognition, and something else, the spark of greed. "I can work with this," he murmured. The assassin crossed his arms. "And now your end of the bargain." Vale nodded, folding the parchment back up and slipping it into his coat. "The Silent Order operates out of the East Quarter. Their leader goes by the name of the Raven. If you want answers, you find her." The assassin's eyes narrowed. "Her?" Vale smirked. "Not every killer is a man," he replied. The assassin turned, his footsteps echoing up the stairwell as he left. The name burned in his mind, the Raven. If she was watching him, it wouldn't be long before they met face to face. And when they did, he intended to be the one asking the questions. The city had its own rhythm, a pulse of whispers and shadowed corners, where secrets were exchanged like currency. As the assassin moved through its veins, he could feel the tension growing. Vale's words echoed in his mind, the Raven. East Quarter. The East Quarter was a maze of twisting alleys and slanted rooftops, the kind of place where eyes watched from cracked windows, and footsteps were muffled by dirt and decay. It was a world unto itself, separate from the grandeur of the merchant squares or the disciplined rows of the malicious quarters. Here, power was invisible, yet omnipresent. He kept his hood low, hands relaxed at his sides. He was just another shadow among many, a flicker in the mist. He knew better than to ask directly. Instead, he watched. Listened. The East Quarter spoke its own language, a nod at the corner of a marketplace, the shuffle of feet outside a boarded-up tavern, the way vendors closed shop a little too quickly when certain men strolled by. It took 3 days before he found what he was looking for. A name. A whisper. "She comes at dusk," a beggar had muttered after a few coins slid into his hand. "Always through the back alleys. You won't see her, but she'll see you." The assassin had nodded, palming another coin before slipping back into the crowd. It wasn't much to go on, but it was enough. Dusk came slowly, the sky bleeding into shades of gray and violet. He perched atop a crumbling stone archway, shrouded in the gathering gloom. From here, he could see the alley stretch out below, narrow, claustrophobic, walls pressing in like jagged teeth. It was the kind of place where light fought to survive, flickering in oil lamps that lined the broken path. He waited, motionless. Hours slipped by, the moon rising, casting pale light through cracks in the stone. His patience was rewarded when a figure stepped out from the shadows, a woman, cloaked and hooded, her movements deliberate and smooth. She walked with the confidence of someone who owned the streets, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to whispers only she could hear. The assassin watched as she paused at the entrance of a dilapidated building, its windows boarded up, the door hanging slightly off its hinges. She knocked once, 3 sharp raps. The door creaked open, and she slipped inside. He moved swiftly, dropping down from his perch, boots hitting the cobblestones with barely a whisper. The door was still ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. He pressed against the wall, listening. Voices murmured from within, low and cautious. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear, orders, perhaps, or secrets being shared. He slipped through the door, his movements liquid and smooth. The hallway stretched out before him, lined with rotting wood and flickering sconces. He kept to the shadows, ears pricked for movement. At the far end of the hall, light spilled out from beneath a door. Voices grew louder, animated, hushed. He crept closer, pressing his back against the wall, eyes fixed on the sliver of light. A man spoke first, his voice gravelly and impatient. "She's getting too close. The merchant guilds are asking questions." Another voice, sharper, almost melodic. "Let them ask. They won't find anything. Not unless we want them to." He recognized the tone, controlled, deliberate. This was the Raven. A third voice chimed in, softer, almost hesitant. "What about the assassin? The one who killed Voss?" Silence. It hung thick in the air before the Raven spoke again. "He's resourceful. But reckless. He'll find us eventually." The assassin's breath stilled. He leaned closer, straining to catch every word. "So, we wait?" the gravelly voice asked, his tone skeptical. The Raven's reply was swift. "We do. And when he comes, we'll make sure he never leaves." A low chuckle followed, the kind that held no mirth. The assassin pulled back, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this, an organized network, a structure that moved silently beneath the city's surface. He had stumbled into something far larger than a simple contract. But that didn't change the mission. If anything, it sharpened his focus. He slipped back down the hallway, moving with the ease of a shadow, silent and untraceable. Outside, the fog had thickened, curling around the corners like ghostly tendrils. He stepped out into the mist, the door creaking shut behind him. He moved swiftly, his mind a flurry of thoughts. The Raven knew he was coming. But that was fine. It meant she would be waiting. And when they finally met, it would not be in shadows and whispers. It would be in blood and steel. The city wore its darkness like a shroud, the mist swirling through the cobbled streets, whispering secrets to those who knew how to listen. The assassin moved with purpose, slipping through alleys and side streets, blending into the rhythm of the shadows. His mind was set, his path clear. If the Raven wanted him to come, he would, on his own terms. But first, there was work to be done. The silent order had woven itself into the city like roots of a twisted tree, deep, hidden, and nearly impossible to untangle. But nearly impossible was good enough. He would unravel their network one thread at a time, expose their operatives, and disrupt their dealings. If the Raven wanted to play a game of patience, he would make sure it was a painful one. His first target was a man named Garek, a fence who operated out of the dockyards. Garek was known for his slippery nature and connections to nearly every black market deal that flowed through the city's veins. Information was his true currency, and the assassin intended to bankrupt him. The docks at night were alive with the hum of illegal activity. Lanterns swung in the breeze, casting long shadows over stacked crates and barrels that reeked of fish and salt. The assassin moved through the fog, his steps silent, his presence a whisper. He knew Garek would be holding court in the back of a tavern near the water, a place called the Rusted Anchor. The sign above the door creaked as it swung lazily in the wind, rust flaking off with each gust. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, slipping inside without a sound. The room was thick with the smell of ale and sweat, the floor sticky beneath his boots. Conversations murmured around him, hushed, wary, edged with danger. Garek was easy to spot, a rotund man with a greasy beard and fingers weighed down by rings that glinted even in the murk of the tavern's light. He held court at the back, flanked by two brutes whose expressions were as dull as their blades. Coins exchanged hands, whispers flitted back and forth, and Garek laughed, a sound like stones tumbling down a well. The assassin approached with measured steps, slipping through the crowd like smoke. When he reached the edge of Garek's table, he placed a single silver coin on the rough wood surface. It clattered softly, drawing Garek's gaze. "Business?" Garek asked, voice oily with false cheer. The assassin pulled back his hood just enough for Garek to see his eyes, cold, sharp, unyielding. Garek's grin faltered. "I know you," he began, but the assassin held up a hand. "Information," he said softly, his voice cutting through the din of the tavern. "About the raven." Garek's eyes darted to his guards, who shifted uneasily. "Never heard of her," he said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The assassin reached into his cloak, pulling out a small vial filled with a clear liquid. He set it on the table, watching Garek's eyes widen. "Truth serum," he whispered, voice like a blade. "You'll drink it, and we'll have a conversation." One of the guards stepped forward, hand moving to the hilt of his sword. The assassin didn't hesitate. His hand snapped out, and the guard's wrist twisted with a sickening crack. The man screamed, stumbling backward, clutching his hand. Silence washed over the tavern, all eyes turned to the table. Garek swallowed hard, his fingers trembling. All right," he stammered, sweat breaking out across his brow. "What do you want to know?" The assassin leaned in, his voice a whisper of threat. "The raven. Where does she operate from?" Garek glanced around nervously before leaning in, his breath reeking of ale. "The catacombs beneath the east quarter," he murmured. "Her people use the old tunnels, safe from prying eyes. There's a meeting tonight. Midnight." The assassin's gaze hardened. "Who else?" "Merchants. Politicians. Even some of the militia." Garek was shaking now, his fingers clutching his tankard as if it might save him. "She's got her hands in everything. You can't fight it. You can't." A gloved hand clamped over Garek's mouth, silencing him. The assassin leaned in close, his voice a whisper of iron. "I already am." With that, he released Garek, slipping back into the crowd before the fence could protest. He moved swiftly, out of the tavern and back into the streets, his mind already racing through plans and contingencies. The catacombs were an old part of the city, long forgotten by most, but perfect for clandestine meetings and hidden operations. If the raven was holding court there, it meant she was feeling confident. That was good. Confidence bred mistakes. Mistakes he could exploit. He slipped into the shadows, his path set. Midnight was hours away, and he intended to be ready. One step at a time, the threads of the silent order would unravel. And when they did, the raven would find her wings clipped, permanently. The rain had started to fall in thin sheets by the time the assassin reached the entrance to the catacombs. He stood in the shadow of the crumbling archway, listening to the water drip from the cracked stone, pooling at his feet. The city above seemed to breathe with every drop, but down here, beneath the surface, there was only silence, thick, suffocating, and unbroken. The entrance was hidden behind a stack of rotting crates, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for, a small iron ring set into the stone, rusted and slick with rain. He grasped it firmly, feeling the chill of the metal bite into his fingers, and pulled. The stone grated, sliding away to reveal a narrow passage descending into darkness. The air that rushed out smelled of damp earth and decay. He moved quickly, stepping inside and pulling the stone door shut behind him, locking the world out. The silence deepened. He lit a small oil lamp, its flickering light casting long shadows on the walls as he descended the worn stone steps. The catacomb stretched out before him like the veins of some ancient beast, twisting, branching, dead-ending in places where time had collapsed the stone. It was a labyrinth in its own right, a perfect hiding place for secrets and shadows. His footsteps were soft, his movements fluid. He knew that the Raven's guards would be posted at strategic points, watching the routes that led to the main chamber. But he had done his research, memorized the old maps, traced the paths in his mind. There were routes not marked, passages long since forgotten even by those who now called the catacombs their own. He moved through one now, a narrow crevice just wide enough for a man to slip through if he turned sideways, his shoulders scraping the stone. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of mildew clung to his cloak. He pressed on, listening, feeling the vibrations of movement through the walls. Voices murmured in the distance, too far to make out, but close enough to confirm he was on the right path. After 20 paces, the crevice widened into an antechamber, small, circular, and lined with old alcoves where bones still rested, untouched for centuries. He paused there, extinguishing his lamp and waiting in the shadows. Patience was a weapon too, one he'd honed to perfection. And so he waited, the darkness folding around him like an old cloak. Minutes later, the first set of footsteps echoed from the tunnel ahead, soft, measured, the sound of a guard making his rounds. The assassin counted the steps, the rhythm, and then, as the guard passed by his alcove, he struck. A blade whispered through the air, and the man collapsed without a sound, crumpling into the dust. The assassin dragged the body into the shadows, checking for anything useful. A key ring glinted in the low light. He pocketed it. The path ahead was clear. He moved deeper, the tunnel sloping downward, spiraling toward the heart of the catacombs. Voices grew louder, gruff, confident, unaware. He pressed himself to the edge of the stone, creeping closer, peering around the bend. The chamber beyond was massive, an old burial hall now transformed into a sanctuary of secrecy. Stone coffins lined the walls, their lids cracked and shifted from years of neglect. A long wooden table stretched the length of the room, piled high with maps, ledgers, and stacks of coins that glimmered in the torchlight. Men and women clustered around it, their faces hidden beneath hoods, their voices hushed. At the far end, elevated on a stone platform, sat the Raven. Her presence was unmistakable. Draped in dark silks, she sat with a grace that belied her reputation, hands folded, eyes sharp and calculating. She listened as those around her spoke in hushed tones, occasionally nodding, occasionally smiling. Her eyes flickered over maps and documents, her fingers tracing routes and marking names. The assassin studied her from the shadows, his eyes narrowing. The Raven had built herself a kingdom of whispers and daggers, but she had grown bold, too bold. Her meetings were becoming public knowledge, her influence spreading too widely to remain hidden. He watched her move, calculating the distance, the guards, the exits. It would have to be quick, clean, one strike, no hesitation. He slipped back into the shadows, retracing his steps, each movement deliberate and measured. He found a side passage that led up and around, positioning him above the main chamber, overlooking the scene from a narrow ledge. He crouched low, silent, his breathing even and controlled. Below, the raven stood, addressing her council. The northern route is secure. We have allies in the Merchants' Guild who will ensure safe passage. The city guard is stretched thin. Now is the time to move, she said, her voice carrying an edge of command. The others nodded, murmuring agreements. The assassin reached into his cloak, fingers brushing against the hilt of a throwing knife. He pulled it free, the blade whispering against the leather. His gaze never wavered. One strike, he told himself. One strike to send the whole tower tumbling. He aimed, feeling the familiar weight settle in his palm. His eyes locked on her throat, just beneath the curve of her jaw. He could almost feel the blade striking true, almost taste the victory that would ripple through the city's underworld like wildfire. But something held him back, a whisper of caution, a flicker of instinct. It was too easy. Too exposed. He scanned the room again, noting the exits, the guards, the positioning of the Raven's lieutenants. She was too calm, too collected, as if she expected something, or someone. A trap. He pulled back, retreating into the shadows, heart steady, mind clear. This wasn't the time. Not yet. But soon. Very soon. He slipped back through the catacombs, his footsteps fading into silence. The raven had made her move. Now it was his turn. The assassin emerged from the catacombs as the first light of dawn spilled over the city walls, casting long shadows across cobblestone streets still slick with rain. He pulled the hood tighter over his head, blending seamlessly with the early morning merchants and weary travelers who shuffled through the city's narrow lanes. His eyes scanned the faces, the movements, everything was information if you knew how to read it. The Raven's operation was expanding. That much was clear. Her grip on the city's underbelly had grown tighter, her network of spies and informants stretching into places that, just a year ago, had been considered untouchable. He had seen it in her eyes during that meeting: confidence, ambition, and something else, something colder. She was preparing for war, not just against rival factions, but perhaps even the city's ruling elite. The assassin moved with purpose, slipping through the winding streets until he reached the edge of the merchant district. Here, the air was thick with the smell of spices and wet leather, the clatter of hooves, and the bark of tradesmen setting up their stalls. He wound his way through the chaos until he reached a small apothecary, its windows dark, shutters closed tight. He knocked once, paused, then knocked twice more. The door creaked open, and a thin man with silver hair and ink-stained fingers peered out. His eyes flickered with recognition, and he stepped back, allowing the assassin to enter. The room beyond was cramped and cluttered, shelves lined with glass vials and jars filled with herbs, roots, and powders that glowed faintly in the dim light. "You're back," the man said, locking the door behind him. "Did you find what you were looking for?" The assassin pulled back his hood, nodding. "More than I expected. The Raven is planning something big. I need to know who her allies are and how deep her roots go." The man, known only as Heron, smiled faintly, his hands clasping together. "Information like that doesn't come cheap. You know the price. The assassin reached into his cloak, producing a small leather pouch. He tossed it onto the table where it landed with a heavy clink. Heron raised an eyebrow, scooping up the pouch and weighing it in his hand. "Generous," he murmured, pocketing the gold. "Generous enough for me to share what I know." He moved to a bookshelf, sliding aside a stack of tattered scrolls to reveal a ledger bound in cracked leather. He flipped through the pages, running a finger along hastily scrawled notes. "The Raven has been meeting with representatives from the Iron Hand, mercenaries from the southern provinces. Cutthroats, the lot of them, but loyal to coin and coin alone. She's also been making nice with the dockside syndicate. Smugglers, primarily. They're moving goods for her, keeping the city watch off her scent." The assassin listened carefully, his gaze never leaving Heron's hands as they danced across the page. "And the nobles? Is she reaching that high?" Heron chuckled darkly. "Oh, she's already there. Lord Banad, Lady Helene, whispers suggest they're in her pocket. Trade deals gone sour, blackmail, debts forgiven. She's playing them like pawns on a board." The assassin's jaw tightened. If the Raven had control over the dockside syndicate and mercenary companies, and now she was reaching into the noble class, then her influence was far stronger than he had anticipated. A storm was brewing, and she was at its center. Heron snapped the book shut, leaning back against the shelf. "So, what are you going to do about it?" he asked, eyes glimmering with curiosity. The assassin didn't answer right away. His mind was already spinning, mapping out scenarios, planning contingencies. "I'm going to do what I always do. Cut off the head of the snake before it bites." Heron nodded approvingly. "Then you'll need more than just a blade this time. She's protected. Heavily." "That's why I came to you," the assassin replied, his voice low and steady. "I need access to the lower tunnels, the old ones that run beneath the merchant district. I want to get close without her knowing." Heron's eyebrows shot up. "The lower tunnels? Those haven't been used in years. They're flooded, collapsed in places. Not to mention—" "I'm aware of the risks," the assassin interrupted, his gaze unyielding. "Can you get me a map?" Heron hesitated, his fingers tapping the leather ledger absently. "I can, but it'll take time. And I expect to be compensated for the risk." The assassin's eyes narrowed. "You'll get your gold. I need it by tomorrow." Heron grunted, nodding. "Tomorrow, then. And watch yourself. If the Raven finds out you're sniffing around her roots, she won't hesitate to gut you like a fish." The assassin smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "She can try." He pulled his hood back over his head, turning toward the door. "And one more thing," Heron called after him. "If you're planning on going after her, you might want to know, she's hosting a gathering. Tomorrow night. High house on the West End. Lots of faces, lots of secrets. Might be a good place to start, if you don't mind walking straight into the wolf's den." The assassin paused, hand on the doorframe. "I never did." And with that, he disappeared back into the crowded streets, shadows folding around him like an old friend. The rain began to fall just as twilight settled over the city, casting the cobblestones in slick, glistening light. The assassin moved through the winding alleys, his cloak pulled tightly around him, obscuring his features from prying eyes. High House loomed ahead, its towering silhouette cutting against the stormy sky. Torches burned brightly at its gates, illuminating guards clad in iron and leather, their eyes sharp and unforgiving. He watched from the shadows, studying their movements, the patterns in their patrol. They were methodical, disciplined, mercenaries, by the look of their armor. Likely from the Iron Hand, just as Heron had suggested. The Raven was pulling out all the stops tonight. Whatever was happening inside High House, she wanted it secure. Untouchable. The assassin smirked beneath his hood. He had always loved a challenge. He slipped around the side of the estate, sticking to the shadows where the torchlight flickered and failed to reach. His hands found purchase on the slick stone wall, and he climbed swiftly, his fingers hooking into cracks and ledges with practiced precision. Rainwater trickled down his sleeves as he ascended, but he paid it no mind. He had done this 1,000 times before, in 1,000 different cities. High House was no different. He reached a narrow ledge, just below a balcony that jutted out over the courtyard. From here, he could see the guards positioned below, 2 at the main doors, another patrolling the perimeter, and a pair stationed at the rear entrance. No one looked up. They never did. With a single, graceful motion, he hoisted himself over the balcony's edge, landing silently on its polished stone floor. The curtains to the chamber beyond were drawn tight, but faint voices drifted from within. He pressed his ear to the cold glass, listening intently. "And what of the shipment from the south?" a gravelly voice asked, muffled by the heavy drapes. "It arrived 2 days ago. The Raven has it stored in the lower vaults, just as you ordered," another voice responded, softer, more hesitant. A pause. Then, the gravelly voice again. "Good. And our esteemed friends from the Dockside Syndicate? They're ready. We only await the signal." The assassin felt his pulse quicken. A shipment from the south, mercenaries at the gate, and the Dockside Syndicate at the ready. Whatever the Raven was planning, it wasn't small. He needed to get inside. Moving swiftly, he tested the latch on the glass door. Locked, of course. He reached into his cloak, pulling free a thin piece of iron, its end bent into a wicked curve. A flick of his wrist, a gentle twist, and the lock clicked open with a soft whisper. He slipped inside, closing the door behind him without a sound. The room was dimly lit, its walls lined with heavy curtains and gilded mirrors. A fire crackled in the far corner, casting long shadows that flickered and danced along the floor. 2 men stood by the hearth, one tall and broad, his face hidden beneath a steel mask, the other shorter, dressed in rich crimson robes. The assassin recognized the masked man immediately, Corvin, one of the Raven's most trusted lieutenants. He had seen him once before, orchestrating a blood-soaked ambush on the city's southern gates. Corvin turned to the man in crimson. "You'll have your cut, as promised. But the Raven wants results. If you don't deliver, she won't hesitate to replace you. Understood?" The robed man nodded hurriedly, beads of sweat glistening on his brow. "Of course. She has my word." Corvin grunted, turning back to the fire. "Good. Then I suggest you leave before the guests arrive. The Raven doesn't like unnecessary eyes." The robed man bowed quickly and shuffled toward the door. The assassin stepped back into the shadows, his breath held tight as the man brushed past him and disappeared into the hallway beyond. He watched Corvin for a moment longer, studying the way he moved, the slight limp in his left leg, an injury, perhaps? Or a weakness? He filed the information away for later. Corvin wouldn't be easy to kill, but everyone had their vulnerabilities. Slipping back out onto the balcony, the assassin moved along the outer ledge, peering into the next chamber. What he saw made him pause. The room was filled with nobles, well-dressed men and women draped in jewels and silks, sipping from golden chalices and laughing over whispered secrets. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp scent of wine, but it wasn't the decadence that held his attention. It was the woman standing at the center of it all, her gaze cool and commanding. The Raven. She was younger than he expected, barely 30, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a confidence that dripped from her every movement. She wore black silk threaded with silver, her hair pulled back in a braid that coiled over her shoulder like a serpent. Her smile was thin, calculated, the kind that was practiced and perfected over years of manipulation. The assassin watched as she moved through the crowd, touching shoulders, whispering in ears, flashing smiles that never quite reached her eyes. She was weaving her web, drawing them in, binding them to her cause. He had seen it before, power disguised as charm, loyalty bought with secrets and favors. He was about to move on when her gaze shifted, locking directly onto his position. For a split second, their eyes met through the glass pane. He held his breath, unmoving. But she only smiled, a slow, knowing smile, before turning back to her guests. The assassin pulled away, his heart pounding in his chest. Had she seen him? Did she know he was there? It seemed impossible, yet that smile. No time to waste. He needed to get back to Heron, to regroup, to plan the next step. Whatever the Raven was planning, it was far bigger than he had anticipated. And if she knew he was coming, the stakes had just risen tenfold. Slipping back down the side of High House, the assassin melted into the shadows of the city streets, his mind already spinning with possibilities and strategies. The game was on. And this time, it wasn't just survival, it was war. The city was alive with whispers by morning. News of the gathering at High House had spread like wildfire through the streets, igniting rumors of alliances, betrayals, and conspiracies brewing beneath the surface. The assassin listened to the murmur of the market as he moved through the crowded stalls, his hood pulled low over his eyes. Vendors shouted prices, children darted between carts, and merchants haggled over silks and spices, but beneath it all was an undercurrent of fear. The Raven's web was tightening, and the city felt it. He made his way to the far edge of the district, past the blacksmith's forge with its hammering clang, past the baker's shop with the scent of fresh bread wafting through the open windows, and into the narrow alleyway that led to Heron's hideout. He tapped 3 times on the wooden door, short, long, short. It creaked open, and Heron's scarred face appeared in the gap. "You're late," Heron grunted, stepping aside to let him in. The assassin slipped past him, pulling back his hood. "I was busy," he replied, scanning the room. Maps lay spread across the table, dotted with ink marks and scribbled notes. Pins marked key locations: High House, the Dockside Syndicate's warehouse, the Iron Hands barracks. "Seems you've been busy too." Heron nodded, shutting the door firmly behind him. "Word travels fast. The Raven's moving. Whatever she's planning, it's happening soon. And she's not being subtle about it." The assassin leaned over the maps, his eyes darting from one mark to another. I saw her last night. She's rallying support, meeting with nobles, cutting deals. And she's got Corvin at her side. Heron's expression darkened. The Iron Mask? The assassin nodded. He was there. And he's in deep. They're moving shipments from the south, something big. And the Dockside Syndicate is part of it. Heron cursed under his breath, pacing the length of the room. If she's got the syndicate, she's got muscle. They've been running the docks for years, smuggling, bribing, breaking legs for coin. If she's bought them, she's got control over every shipment coming in and out of the city. The assassin straightened, his eyes sharp. We need to get inside that warehouse. Whatever's coming in from the south, it's the key to all of this. Heron paused, his gaze settling on the assassin. It won't be easy. The syndicate's men are no street thugs. They're disciplined, ruthless. And they guard that place like it's a damned fortress. A grin flickered across the assassin's face. Good. I like a challenge. Heron shook his head, though a hint of a smile played at his lips. You're insane, you know that. So I've been told. They spent the next hour planning, marking routes, pinpointing guard rotations, and discussing the best time to strike. The syndicate operated on a tight schedule. Shipments came in every 2 days, under the cover of darkness, unloaded by candlelight to avoid the watchful eyes of the city guards. Their next delivery was set for the following night, just before the bells of midnight. Heron tapped the map with a calloused finger. There's a back entrance here, hidden under the old dockway. It's mostly used for smuggling smaller crates, but it'll get you inside. From there, you'll need to move quickly. Corvin's men patrol the warehouse floor, but there's a break between shifts. You'll have 15 minutes, tops. The assassin memorized the route, his mind already mapping the shadows, the ledges, the blind spots. He knew how to move unseen. It was second nature now. And the exit? He asked. Heron hesitated. There's a catch. The only way out, aside from the front gates, is through the cellar tunnels. They're old, flooded in places, and only the syndicate knows the paths that aren't collapsed. You'll be running blind. The assassin considered it for a moment, then nodded. I'll manage. Heron raised an eyebrow. You always do. They shook hands, the grip firm and unspoken. No promises. No guarantees. Just the understanding of what had to be done. The assassin left just as the sun dipped below the city walls, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. He moved with purpose, his cloak billowing in the evening breeze, his eyes sharp and calculating. He knew the path to the docks well enough. He'd walked it 1,000 times in silence, watched the guards, noted the schedules, memorized the creaking of doors and the flicker of torchlight. But tonight would be different. Tonight, he wouldn't be watching from the shadows. He would be stepping into them. The air grew heavier as he neared the docks, the scent of brine and wetwood thick in his nostrils. Lanterns swung from iron hooks, casting pools of light across the weathered planks. Men worked in silence, loading crates, hauling barrels, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hoods. Syndicate men, every one of them. He slipped into the alley beside the main warehouse, his footsteps muffled by the rain-slick stones. The hidden entrance Heron spoke of was just ahead, a rusted iron grate, half concealed by a pile of broken crates. He pried it open with a grunt, the metal groaning in protest, and slipped inside. The passageway was dark, damp, the air thick with the smell of rot and salt. He moved swiftly, feeling his way through the dark, counting his steps until he reached the end. A ladder led upwards, its rungs slick with moisture. He climbed silently, pushing open the trapdoor at the top with deliberate slowness. The warehouse stretched out before him, rows of crates stacked high, marked with symbols he didn't recognize. Men patrolled the aisles, lanterns swinging at their sides. He watched them for a moment, noting their paths, their blind spots. Then he slipped from the shadows, moving with the silence of a whisper, his eyes fixed on the largest crate in the center of the room. It was marked with a sigil he'd seen once before, back in the chambers of High House, etched onto the doorframe of the Raven's private quarters. He approached it cautiously, running his hands along the edges, searching for traps or alarms. Finding none, he lifted the lid, just enough to peer inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. Inside the crate, stacked in neat, organized rows, were vials, hundreds of them, filled with a dark, swirling liquid that pulsed with an unnatural light. He recognized it instantly. The same poison used in the dockside murders 2 months ago. The same poison that had killed men before they even hit the ground. The Raven wasn't just consolidating power. She was preparing for war. The assassin lowered the lid, his mind spinning with possibilities. He needed to get back to Heron. He needed to warn the others. But as he turned to leave, he heard it, the faintest whisper of movement behind him. He spun, just in time to see Corvin step from the shadows, his iron mask gleaming in the dim light. "Well, well," Corvin said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Looks like the rat found his way into the grain." The assassin's hands tightened around his daggers, his heart pounding. There was no running now. No slipping into the shadows. It was time to fight. The warehouse fell silent. Even the creaking of old wood and the distant lapping of water against the dock seemed to fade into nothingness. It was as if the very air had been pulled from the room, leaving only the soft, echoing sound of footsteps as Corvin approached. His iron mask gleamed in the dim light, polished to a mirror-like shine that caught the flicker of distant lanterns. Behind the slits, his eyes burned with cruel amusement. He moved slowly, deliberately, each step heavy with confidence. The assassin remained motionless, fingers coiled around the hilts of his daggers, muscles tensed like a bowstring. "You've been busy," Corvin remarked, his voice a low rumble beneath the metal of his mask. "Sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Poking around in places you don't understand." He paused, tapping the crate of vials with a gloved hand. "Did you really think you'd just waltz in here and walk out? That no one would notice?" The assassin's grip tightened. His eyes flicked around the room, counting the shadows, measuring the distance to the exit. He'd have to move fast. Corvin wasn't alone, no man like him ever was. But the flicker of torchlight didn't betray any other figures. "Not yet. I wasn't planning on waltzing out," the assassin replied, his voice low and steady. "I was planning on burning it to the ground." Corvin chuckled, the sound metallic and harsh through the mask. "Bold words. Shame you won't live to see it." He snapped his fingers, and the shadows moved. From the edges of the warehouse, syndicate enforcers emerged, 5, 6, then 10, their faces obscured, blades glinting in the torchlight. They fanned out, circling the perimeter, their footsteps muffled against the wooden floorboards. The assassin's eyes darted between them, noting their positions, their stances. Amateurs, mostly. But amateurs with numbers. He'd have to be quick. Efficient. Corvin spread his arms wide, gesturing to the men. I have to admit, I'm almost impressed. Almost. But this little game of cat and mouse ends tonight. The Raven sends her regards. The assassin smirked. I'll be sure to return the favor. Without another word, he moved. His daggers flashed in the darkness, catching the light for just an instant before they plunged into flesh. The nearest enforcer staggered back, clutching at his throat as crimson poured between his fingers. The assassin flowed like water, slipping between their formations, striking with precision and deadly intent. A blade arced towards his head, he ducked, spinning low, sweeping the attacker's legs from under him before driving his blade into the man's chest. Another rushed from behind, the assassin sidestepped, pivoting to slam his elbow into the man's jaw, following with a clean slice across the neck. It was over in moments. 6 men lay sprawled across the floor, blood pooling beneath their still bodies. The assassin stood in the center, breathing evenly, his blades dripping red. Corvin hadn't moved. He watched with dispassionate interest, his hands folded behind his back. When the last man fell, he sighed dramatically. I expected more from them. I'll be sure to pass along my disappointment. The assassin raised an eyebrow, cleaning his blades on the hem of a fallen cloak. Maybe you should come down here and show me how it's done. Corvin's eyes glinted with amusement behind the iron. Oh, I intend to. He reached up, unfastening the clasps at the sides of his mask with a deliberate slowness. Metal scraped against leather as he pulled it free, revealing the scarred and twisted visage beneath. His skin was pale, marred with jagged lines of old wounds. One eye was clouded with milky blindness, the other sharp and black as coal. A deep gash ran from his temple to his jaw, cutting through the remnants of a once handsome face. Corvin tossed the mask aside. It clattered across the floor with a hollow clang. He stretched his neck, rolling his shoulders like a predator preparing to pounce. It's been a long time since I did this myself, he said, his voice raw and unfiltered. The assassin's eyes narrowed. You don't have to, he replied evenly. You can walk away. Pretend you never saw me. Corvin laughed, sharp, barking, humorless. Walk away? No, my friend. I'm just getting started. He moved with startling speed, faster than any man his size should have. His fist slammed into the assassin's ribs, sending him stumbling back. Pain flared up his side, and he sucked in a breath, barely managing to dodge the follow-up strike aimed at his throat. Corvin was relentless, pressing forward with calculated ferocity. His strikes were precise, brutal, honed from years of combat. The assassin blocked, parried, ducked, but each blow rattled his bones, forcing him back step by step. Not bad, Corvin sneered, throwing a hook that the assassin barely deflected. You're quicker than I thought. The assassin slid back, catching his breath. His eyes flickered to the crates stacked behind Corvin, the ones marked with the sigil of the Raven. An idea sparked in his mind, dangerous and desperate. Corvin charged, but the assassin was ready. He sidestepped, lashing out with a blade that nicked Corvin's cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. Corvin grunted, wiping the crimson streak away with the back of his hand. "That was a mistake." "No," the assassin replied, his eyes hard. "This is." He hurled a dagger, not at Corvin, but at the crate behind him. It struck true, piercing the wood and shattering one of the glass vials inside. The dark liquid spilled out, hissing and bubbling as it made contact with the wooden floor. Corvin's eyes widened. "What the hell did you?" The assassin moved before he could finish, launching himself at the towering stack of crates, his shoulders slamming into the base. The wood splintered, and the entire row collapsed, shattering vials and spreading the poison across the floor. Smoke rose from the liquid, thick and acrid, filling the warehouse with a suffocating haze. Corvin staggered back, coughing, eyes watering as the air thickened with poison. The assassin didn't wait. He turned, sprinting towards the back exit, his footsteps pounding against the floorboards. Behind him, Corvin's shouts echoed through the haze, but they were distant, garbled by the smoke and fumes. He reached the iron grate, yanking it open and slipping inside just as syndicate enforcers poured into the warehouse, their voices shouting in confusion and panic. He didn't stop, didn't look back, moving through the darkness of the tunnel with the certainty of a man who knew his path. He emerged in the chill of the night air, gasping, sweat slick on his brow. He paused only long enough to catch his breath before slipping back into the shadows, his mind already turning to Heron and the next move. Corvin had survived. He was certain of it. Men like him didn't die easily. But now, the war had truly begun. Would you like me to continue with Part 15, where the assassin and Heron regroup to plan their counterstrike, knowing that Corvin and the Raven will not rest until blood is spilled? In the twilight of his years, the assassin had become a myth, a shadow that flickered through the darkest alleys of memory and fear. His name, once whispered in hushed voices, had faded into legend, yet his story continued to echo across the lands. Nobles told tales of his daring strikes, peasants feared the whisper of his blade, and merchants spoke of the man who could slip through castle walls like smoke. But the assassin himself was weary. His bones ached from countless nights spent lurking in damp cellars, his hands still bore the faint scars of blades long rusted and forgotten. He had outlived his enemies, escaped 1,000 traps, and evaded countless pursuers. He was the last of a dying breed, an artist of the silent kill in a world that had grown loud and chaotic. Yet, the final reckoning was coming. Word had spread of a new alliance. The kings of the neighboring territories, tired of living under the specter of his blade, had gathered their forces. It was said that a bounty unlike any before had been placed on his head, enough gold to fill the throne room of a castle. Mercenaries, bounty hunters, even rival assassins answered the call. The greatest hunter of men had now become the hunted. The assassin knew there was no running this time. He had seen the faces of those who sought him, young, eager, driven by greed and a taste for glory. He had been like them once, hungry and ruthless. Now, they came for him, armed with steel and ambition. He could smell their desperation. He chose his ground carefully, an old, crumbling fortress perched on the edge of a jagged cliff, where the sea crashed against the rocks with fury. It was a relic from another age, its walls cracked and broken, its battlements long abandoned. He rigged traps along the corridors, set tripwires beneath fallen stone, and scattered caltrops in the shadows. If they were going to take him, it would be on his terms. The assault came at dawn. Arrows darkened the sky, swords clashed against stone, and shouts echoed through the hollow ruins. They came in waves, first the bounty hunters, greedy and careless, then the soldiers, disciplined but predictable. He moved among them like a ghost, striking from the shadows, vanishing before their blades could find him. But there were too many. The assassin fought as he always had, silent, swift, merciless. Blood stained the stone floors, bodies crumpled where they stood. Yet, for every man that fell, 2 more took his place. His breath grew ragged, his strikes slower, his vision blurred with exhaustion and blood. The traps had run their course, and still, they came. He knew it was the end when he reached the highest tower. The door was barricaded behind him, the cold sea wind whipping through the broken stone. Below, the surviving soldiers gathered, their torches flickering in the morning mist. He could hear their footsteps, measured, patient, closing in. The assassin looked out over the horizon, the waves crashing against the jagged rocks below. There was no escape this time. But there was still a choice. He could surrender, face the blade of an executioner, die as a pawn in the game of kings, or he could decide his own fate. He stepped to the edge of the tower, the wind tearing at his cloak. For a moment, he stood still, letting the salt air fill his lungs. He closed his eyes, remembering every name, every face, every whisper in the dark. His life had been lived in the shadows, but his end would be beneath the open sky. Without hesitation, he stepped forward into the wind. Below, the soldiers watched as the shadow fell, tumbling gracefully into the crashing waves below. They waited, but no body surfaced, no trace of the man remained. The assassin was gone, swallowed by the sea, a ghost returned to the shadows. In time, the stories would fade, and the legends would change. Some said he survived, slipping away into the wilderness to haunt the edges of civilization. Others believed he had simply vanished, claimed by the spirits of the land. But those who knew better, those who had faced him in the dark, knew the truth. The assassin had written his own ending, just as he had lived his life, on his own terms, without fear, without mercy. And in the silence that followed, his legend lived on.